He held her in his arms, blood staining his hands, and love burning in his eyes moments after ending the life of the man who tried to claim her. She was meant to be a bride, not a fugitive. He was supposed to be her captor, not her salvation. But when bullets tore through the air and the world turned against them, all that remained was a bond fierce enough to defy centuries of hate. This wasn't just romance, it was survival rebellion, and the fight to love freely in a world that forbade it. The New Mexico sun blazed mercilessly over the plains, cracking the dry earth beneath the wagon wheels. Dust rose in thick clouds clinging to Clara Wynnfield's soft skin and to the folds of her once fine dress. The locket around her neck, her mother's, burned against her chest, a cruel reminder of the life she'd lost, and the one she was being forced toward Rafe Holloway. Even the name made her stomach twist. Her father called him a man of influence. She called him what he was, a brute with a title. The marriage had been arranged to save her family after her father's trading company went under. "It's your duty," her father had said. "The price of honor." But what of love? Of freedom? Clara's fists tightened in her lap. The dry wind tangled her chestnut hair across her face as she stared at the endless horizon, whispering silent prayers that something, anything, would stop this march toward a living death. The answer came in chaos. A sharp whistle split the air. Then came the cries of men, the thunder of hooves, the screams. Arrows hissed through the wind like whispers of death. Gunfire cracked. The caravan exploded into panic as shadowed riders surrounded them, faces streaked with earth and ash. Clara froze in terror. Before she could even scream, strong arms wrapped around her waist and yanked her from the wagon. She thrashed and kicked nails, clawing into flesh as her voice broke with fear. "Let me go." Her captor said nothing. He threw her across his horse like she weighed nothing, her face pressed against warm muscle and worn leather as the world blurred dust, fire, and sky until she felt it a hand at her neck. "No," she gasped, breath trembling. "Don't kiss my neck." But he didn't. He said nothing at all. His grip only tightened slightly, not in threat, but as if grounding her. His body was heat and stone, steady as the horse beneath them thundered over the land. Clara's heart pounded like a drum. Every part of her screamed to escape, yet something inside her quivered at his closeness. His scent smoke, cedar, and wind filled her senses. She hated it. She hated him. And yet, she turned her head just enough to glimpse his face. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, black hair whipping in the wind. But his eyes, not cruel, not wild, burned with something ancient, something wounded. Then darkness swallowed her as the desert claimed its captive. When Clara woke, her head throbbed with pain. Her wrists ached. Fear surged through her chest as she blinked up at an unfamiliar ceiling, a dome of woven branches and hides, faint light leaking through the cracks. She tried to sit up but winced. Her arms were bound, not tightly, but enough to remind her she wasn't free. A wool blanket covered her legs. Beneath it, her torn dress clung to her dust-caked skin. Her mouth was dry, her lips cracked. There was still blood under her nails. Panic returned like a wave. The attack, the screams, the fire. Being pulled from the wagon, thrown across a saddle, the silent warrior, his hand, his breath, his eyes. Hours of wind and heat until blackness, now here. "Try not to struggle," a deep voice said from the shadows. Her head snapped toward the sound. He was there, cross-legged beside the fire pit, bare-chested, his sun-darkened skin wrapped with leather bands. His long black hair hung loose at his neck, and his eyes, sharp, watchful, studied her like a hawk circling prey. You, she whispered, her voice unsteady. I am Tay Blackthorn, he said simply, gaze unwavering. Clara stared. Why am I here? You were taken. No, she snapped, anger trembling beneath her fear. You took me. He nodded once. Yes. Then why? What do you want from me? Her voice shook, but she raised her chin with defiance. If you think you can ransom me, my father has nothing. And if you think I'll beg, you're wrong. Tay Blackthorn rose from where he sat, moving with slow, measured grace. The firelight flickered against his bronze skin as he crossed the space between them. Clara Wynnfield stiffened when he knelt beside her, her heartbeat hammering in her chest. Instead of violence, he reached for a small clay bowl resting near her bedroll and held it out. Water, he said simply. She didn't move. What is this poison? She asked sharply, one brow lifting. Tay said nothing. He dipped his finger into the bowl, took a sip himself, then extended it again, his dark eyes steady. Clara hesitated, then reached for it. The cool liquid hit her dry throat, and she nearly groaned with relief, drinking greedily until some spilled down her chin. When the bowl was empty, she dropped it beside her blanket, wiping her mouth. I want to go home, she murmured at last. He looked at her, really looked, and something shifted in his gaze. Not the hardness of a captor, but something older, deeper. Pain lived in those eyes, buried beneath years of silence. There's no going back, he said quietly. Her brows furrowed. You think this is my new life, being your prisoner? No, he replied. But the world you knew ended the moment you stepped into mine. The days that followed blurred together. Clara remained in the lodge, watched, but never mistreated. Her bindings were removed after the second day. Food came regularly, roasted vegetables, venison, warm bread from stone ovens. She refused at first, proud and silent, but hunger eventually forced her to take it. Long before she saw the village, she heard it laughter of children, neighing horses, the steady rhythm of drums at dusk. Life, raw, human, unpolished. These weren't monsters. They were people. Still, they avoided her. Some stared with suspicion, others with resentment. A few of the younger women studied her with shy curiosity, but none approached. She was an outsider, a reminder of every scar between two worlds. And she knew it. She tried to escape twice. The first time she barely made it beyond 20 yards before an old woman, surprisingly quick, tackled her into the dirt and dragged her back. The second time she reached the horse pens, her heart racing with hope, before Tay caught her by the wrist. Where will you go? He asked, breathless from the chase. Anywhere but here, she spat. His eyes narrowed. Do you think they'll welcome you back? After what they believe you've become, I don't care what they believe, she snapped. I won't be yours. Tay didn't argue. He only looked at her long, quiet, unreadable. Then said softly, I never asked you to be. And he walked away. That night the sky broke open. Thunder rolled like the voice of an angry god. Rain hammered the desert floor, drumming against the hide roof. Clara curled beneath her blanket, trembling, her mind swimming with ghosts. Her mother's perfume. Her sister's laughter. Her father's voice before ruin claimed him. Then Rafe Holloway. She remembered his grip on her wrist, the cold gleam in his eyes when he'd told her she'd learn obedience soon enough. And finally Tay. He hadn't hurt her, not once. He hadn't even touched her since the day of the raid. Always near, always watching, but distant as though waiting for something even he couldn't name. The flap of the lodge opened suddenly, and wind rushed in with the rain. Tay stepped inside, soaked through his dark hair, clinging to his face, water dripping from his jaw. His chest rose and fell heavily. I thought you should know, he said between breaths, the river's flooding. If you try to run tonight, it will take you with it. Why do you care? She asked, pushing herself up on one elbow. His voice dropped quiet as the rain. Because I've already lost enough to that river. She sat up, fully studying him. You speak like a man who carries ghosts. I do. Silence settled between them, broken only by the soft tapping of rain. Clara's voice lowered. Why don't you hate me? Tay tilted his head slightly. Who says I don't? A bitter smile touched her lips. You haven't beaten me. Or chained me. Or worse. I'm not Rafe Holloway, he said firmly. She froze, eyes narrowing. You know his name. I know many things, he answered. I know your father traded your hand to settle his debts. I know Holloway treats women like livestock. And I know you fought like a wolf when I took you. He stepped closer, the firelight cutting sharp lines across his face. And I know, he finished, his voice low and steady. You don't belong to any man. Clara's throat tightened. Then what am I? Tay Blackthorn's voice dropped, low, rough as gravel. A woman who doesn't yet know her own strength. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat the air between them changed like the first crack of thunder after years of drought. You hate me, she said softly, uncertain if it was a question or confession. Why don't you hurt me? His jaw tensed. He looked away for a long moment before turning back, his voice quiet but cutting. I don't hurt what I desire. Clara didn't move. Her chest rose and fell with slow, uneven breaths. Outside, the desert wind had gone still. The fire in the lodge flickered low, its light painting gold across his face and hers. She didn't answer. She lay back down, not in fear, but in thought. And for the first time since the raid, she fell asleep not from exhaustion, but because she wanted to. By the week's end, the village had stopped looking through her. A few children approached her cautiously, offering small woven charms or shy smiles. An old woman, Aylin Sunshadow Tay's aunt, brought her a cloak made of soft hide. Clara accepted it, not sure whether it was pity or welcome, but something in her chest ached anyway. She saw Tay often. He never forced conversation, never demanded anything. But each time he passed, her heart fluttered like it was betraying her. One afternoon, she found him tending to a younger man, no older than 20, with a deep gash across his ribs. Tay's hands were steady, his voice low and calm, as he pressed herbs into the wound. Your brother, Clara asked quietly from a distance. He looked up, surprised to see her there. Yes, his name is Nako Iron Trail. Clara nodded, watching him work. You take care of him. He's all I have left, Tay said simply. Her gaze softened. That makes 2 of us, she whispered. They didn't speak again that day, but something wordless bound them closer, a thread neither could cut. 2 lost souls circling the same wound, afraid to name what was forming between them. The desert sun hung low that evening, spilling gold and copper across the sky. Clara sat on a small ridge overlooking the village wind, tugging at her hair. Below her, smoke curled lazily from cook fires. Barefoot children chased each other through the dust, and the sound of drums rose in the distance, steady, alive. She no longer thought about escape. Not because she had surrendered, but because something deep inside her had shifted, something fragile, unnamed. Days turned into weeks. And though she kept whispering to herself that she hated this place, that she hated him, the truth was harder and harder to deny. She was beginning to feel safe. Her eyes wandered across the clearing until they found Tay training with 2 young warriors near the tree line. His bare chest glistened with sweat, his movements sharp yet fluid, grace shaped by discipline and fire. When he paused to correct one of the warriors' stances, Clara caught the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. It startled her every time, quiet, rare, but real. She hadn't meant to stare. Yet her gaze found him without her consent. Her thoughts, too. She shook her head and rose from the ridge, trying to steady her breathing. She needed distance. She needed to remember who she was. But when she turned, he was already walking toward her. "You're following me now," she said, folding her arms across her chest. Tay stopped a few steps away, amusement flickering in his eyes. "You've been sitting here for an hour. I thought maybe you were planning another escape." "I told you," she muttered. "I'm not running." "I believe you." "Then what do you want?" she asked, wary. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Clara frowned, unwrapping it to find 2 pieces of dried fruit and a strip of salted meat. "I didn't ask for food," she said quietly. "I know." Their eyes met. "Why are you always watching me?" she asked, her voice barely above the wind. "You pretend not to care, but you're always there." He hesitated, then said softly, "Because I see you, Clara." She swallowed hard. "What does that mean? You walk like someone who's worn chains, even if they're gone now," he said. "And you speak like someone who's learned to stay quiet, but I can see the fire beneath your skin." His voice lowered, steady and unflinching. "You were never meant to be caged. Not just because of what he said, but because he was right." "You don't know me," Clara Wynnfield whispered. "No," Tay Blackthorne replied, his voice steady. "But I want to." The silence between them stretched, thin, fragile, electric. She should have turned away, should have told him to stop looking at her like that. But instead she asked quietly, "Do you ever regret taking me?" Tay's gaze drifted toward the fading sky, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he said at last. Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because I didn't know it would make me want something I can't have." He bowed his head slightly and turned away, leaving her alone with the small bundle in her hands and a storm gathering in her chest. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Her thoughts tangled with ghosts of the world she'd left behind the house, the laughter that had once filled it, and the man waiting to reclaim her. Rafe Holloway, cold, cruel, proud, a man who treated promises like chains and women like possessions. Then her mind betrayed her, wandering back to Tay, his hands, his stillness, the way his eyes saw straight through the walls she'd spent her life building. Desire whispered to her in the dark, quiet, but relentless. 2 days later, everything changed. A scout galloped into the village at dawn, dust curling behind him like smoke. His face was tight with urgency. Tay met him near the council fire, where Håkon Kraushield and the elders had gathered. Their words were low, sharp, and heavy with warning. From a distance, Clara watched a chill already twisting through her chest. She didn't need to hear the words to know something was coming. She approached slowly, catching Tay's eye. He stepped away from the others and met her halfway. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight. "Rafe Holloway." Her stomach dropped. "What about him?" "He's coming," Tay said grimly. "With men mercenaries, maybe more." Her mouth went dry. "For me." He didn't deny it. "Then I have to go," she said, panic rising. He stepped closer. "No. Tay, you don't understand what he'll do if he finds me. He'll drag me back, put on a smile for the world, and tell everyone I was kidnapped and lost my mind. He'll own me again, and no one will question it." Tay's jaw tightened. Her eyes were wild with fear. "We have to run," she pleaded. He stood silent for a long moment, then nodded once. Before sunrise, they rode. The desert stretched before them, endless gold and rust wind cutting sharp against their faces. Tay led the way, and Clara followed close behind, gripping the reins of her borrowed horse. They carried only what mattered, water food and weapons. They didn't speak for hours. Only the pounding of hooves and the hum of the wind filled the silence between them. By mid-afternoon, they reached a narrow canyon framed by jagged cliffs. Tay stopped sliding off his horse. "We'll rest here. The sun will kill the horses if we keep going." Clara dismounted, her legs trembling from exhaustion. She followed him into the cool shade of a shallow cave where the air felt like mercy. He handed her a small piece of bread and a canteen. She took them without a word, chewing slowly. After a while, she whispered, "How long can we keep running?" "As long as we must," he said simply. She studied him. "You've done this before. I was born running." Their eyes met, steady, unflinching. Something passed between them again. A weight, an understanding. "You're not afraid," she said softly. "I am," he admitted. "Of what?" He hesitated. "Of wanting something the world says I can't have." Her throat tightened. "Tay." He lifted a hand gently. "Don't say anything. Not unless you mean it." Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely breathe. She wanted to tell him she did mean it, that the fear inside her had shifted no longer about survival, but about losing something she hadn't yet claimed. He reached out slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away. His fingers traced the curve of her jaw, pausing at her throat. "You told me not to kiss your neck," he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. "Do you still mean it?" She met his eyes, her breath trembling. "No." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to stop him. She didn't. Their lips met soft at first, hesitant, then certain. By nightfall, they lay together beneath the open stretch of desert sky, wrapped in the warmth of each other and the quiet hum of the canyon wind. The stars blinked faintly above old witnesses to the fire still glowing between them. Clara Wynnfield traced a long scar along Tay Blackthorn's ribs with her fingertip. "What happened here?" she asked softly. He glanced down, voice rough. "A raid. I was 16. She moved her hand lower, tracing another scar near his side. "And this one," he hesitated. "Rafe Holloway's men. 2 winters ago." Clara sighed, her voice a whisper. "I wish I had known you then." Tay gave a faint smile. "I'm glad you didn't. I wasn't someone worth knowing." She shook her head. "You still don't see yourself the way I do." He bent forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sleep," he murmured. "We move before dawn." She closed her eyes against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She knew this peace wouldn't last, but for now she needed it. At sunrise, Betrayal found them. They had just reached the top of a ridge when Tay suddenly pulled his horse to a stop, his eyes narrowing toward the horizon. "What is it?" Clara asked. He didn't answer. Dismounting swiftly, he crouched to the ground, brushing his fingers over the sand. "Tracks," he muttered. "Fresh ones." Before she could respond, a single gunshot shattered the stillness, then another. "Go!" he shouted. 4 riders burst from behind the rock's dust gunfire. Chaos, Hank Dobbs, Lou Ramsey, Wade Harlan, and Brax Redmaw, Rafe Holloway's hired guns. Tay drew his rifle, pushing Clara behind him. "Run to the canyon," he barked. "Not without you," she cried. "Go, Clara." She ran, heart-pounding, skirt-torn lungs burning. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, followed by a roar behind her, raw and furious. She didn't stop until the shots faded, until only the sound of her own ragged breath remained. When she turned back, the desert was silent. Clara fell to her knees, dust swirling around her. Her dress was torn and stained with dirt, sweat, and blood, though she couldn't tell whose. Her chest heaved as her gaze climbed the ridge. The last image burned in her mind. Tay twisting away from a blow, meant to kill his body, moving like instinct, like defiance itself. Now nothing. Silence. She forced herself to stand, every step trembling beneath the weight of fear. She climbed the ridge, ignoring the voice screaming at her to run the other way. Then she saw him. Tay was on his knees, blood soaking the sand beneath him. His side was torn open, yet he was still upright, chest rising in defiance. 2 mercenaries lay dead at his feet. A third core dust horn was limping away into the hills, clutching his bleeding arm. The 4th man stood 10 paces away, Rafe Holloway, revolver in hand, a smug smile curling his lips. "You look like hell, savage?" Rafe sneered, wiping sweat from his brow with a silk handkerchief. "But you sure gave us a show." Clara crouched behind a cluster of rocks, her fists clenched. He hadn't seen her. She could flee, disappear into the wild. But something deep inside her snapped. She stepped out from cover, voice sharp and steady. "Drop it." Rafe spun around, startled, then grinned. "Well, isn't this a sight? I wondered when you'd show yourself." Her hand trembled slightly, but she lifted the pistol Tay had given her days ago, his last resort. "Back away from him," she ordered. Rafe laughed, stepping forward. "Come now, Clara. You can't be serious. I'm not your possession." "No," he said smoothly. "You're mine by law. By contract. I'm not yours by anything," she snapped, her voice cracking with fury. Tay Blackthorne groaned, struggling to rise, but his knees buckled beneath him. Rafe Holloway noticed. He leveled his gun, the barrel aimed square at Tay's head. "You'll come with me," he snarled, voice low and venomous. "Or I'll put a bullet through his skull right where he kneels." Clara Wynnfield stepped forward, her hands steady despite the terror pounding through her veins. "You pull that trigger," she said coldly, "and I'll put one through your throat." Rafe smirked. "You don't have the guts." Her eyes burned. "Try me." The canyon went still, air sharp. The silence stretched thin. Then behind Rafe, Tay moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't clean. But it was enough. He lunged his arm, catching Rafe's leg and yanking him down. The revolver fired wild, the sound splitting the sky. The 2 men hit the ground, locked in a brutal struggle, sand and blood flying. Rafe cursed and fought, clawing to break free. Tay's hands closed around his throat, but his strength was fading, his wounds draining what little life remained. Clara saw the fight slipping from him. Rafe's fingers reached for the gun, glinting just inches away. Without thinking, Clara darted forward and kicked it out of reach. Then, desperate and furious, she snatched a rock from the dirt and swung. The crack of impact echoed through the canyon. Rafe went limp, collapsing in the dust. Clara dropped to her knees beside Tay, grabbing his face in her hands. Hey, look at me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Stay with me." His eyelids fluttered open, breath ragged. "You didn't run?" he rasped. "Of course I didn't," she said, brushing the sweat and blood from his face. "I'm not leaving you." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Stubborn." "Damn right." But her voice trembled. She pressed her forehead against his. "We have to move," she whispered. "Can you walk?" "Maybe," he murmured. "With you." She half carried him through the canyon, stopping only when he faltered to catch his breath. Blood trailed behind them, a red thread against the dust. But she didn't care. All that mattered was getting him away, before Rafe woke. Hours later, they stumbled into a shallow cave and collapsed inside. Clara tore strips from what remained of her dress, binding his wound, washing it with the last of her water. She whispered to him the whole time, begging him not to close his eyes. He stayed awake barely. "Why are you crying?" he asked, weakly, touching her cheek with blood-stained fingers. "Because I almost lost you." He smiled faintly. "You didn't." That night she sat with her back against the cool stone Tay's head resting in her lap. She stroked his hair until sleep finally took him, then kept watch the pistol tight in her hand. The silence pressed around her heavy raw. Her heart ached with too much pain, too much love. She couldn't lose him, not now. By morning the bleeding had slowed. He burned with fever, but he was alive. Clara fed him what little food they had, coaxing him to drink. He drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring words in a language she didn't understand, names she didn't know. She never left his side. But she knew they couldn't stay. Rafe would come. Others too. So she made a choice. She pressed a kiss to Tay's forehead, whispering, "I'll come back for you." Then she mounted her horse and rode hard toward the only place that could save him, the Apache village. Dust rose behind her as she broke through the camp. Villagers shouted, grabbing weapons, but she didn't slow. She rode straight through the heart of the village, reining in only when she saw Nako Iron Trail standing by the council fire. "Where is he?" he demanded, shock flickering across his face. In a canyon, she gasped, breathless. "He's hurt badly. He needs help." Suspicion darkened Nako's eyes. "And we're supposed to believe you didn't lure him into a trap. I don't care what you believe," she shouted, her voice cracking. "He's dying. I came back for him, not for you." For a moment, the silence felt like judgment. Then Nako nodded once. Within minutes, a small group of warriors elders and Tala Moonfire, the healer, mounted up. They rode through the night, hard and fast. When they reached the canyon, they found Tay where she'd left him, barely breathing, but still alive. They carried him back on a stretcher. Clara followed behind, hollow-eyed, her dress-torn lips cracked by wind and dust. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just watched, caught between two worlds that would never see her the same again. They brought her food, but no one spoke to her. She didn't mind. She wasn't there for them, she was there for him. Nako Iron Trail broke the silence first. "You could have let him die," he said quietly. Clara Wynnfield looked up, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion and grief. "I couldn't." "Why?" "Because he saw me," she whispered, "before I ever saw myself." Nako said nothing after that, but he stayed a while longer, watching her with a look somewhere between respect and sorrow. That night, Clara dreamed of fire, the raid, the dust, the first time she'd seen Tay Blackthorn's eyes in the chaos. She remembered how she'd hated him, how she'd feared him, and how somehow that fear had turned into need. And now love. The fever broke on the fourth night. Clara was still there when his eyes opened. He blinked against the light, then at her face hovering close. She brushed her fingertips along his cheek, tender and trembling. "Clara," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. "You're still here." She smiled through her tears. "You sound surprised." "I am." "You shouldn't be," she said softly. "I told you I'm not leaving." He reached weakly for her hand, his thumb brushing her wrist. "Then I'll stay alive," he murmured. "For you." She bent down and kissed him, slow, aching, full of everything they had fought to keep. Tears slipped down her face as his eyes fluttered shut again. Somewhere deep in the desert, the wind shifted. The land exhaled the dust, settling at last. By dawn, the sky still burned faintly red from the fire that had devoured Rafe Holloway's ambush. Smoke curled into the horizon like black ghosts carried off by the wind. The Apache village lay in uneasy silence, not celebrating, not mourning, just waiting. Clara stood outside Tala Moonfire's tent, hands trembling from exhaustion. Blood clung to the edge of her tunic. Her hair hung loose and tangled, streaked with sweat and dust that painted her face like war paint. She hadn't left Tay's side since the moment he'd awakened, since the moment he'd whispered her name and reminded her that he was still hers to lose. Now she stood alone as the sun dipped toward the horizon, her heart bruised but still beating, her soul trapped in that fragile quiet between survival and whatever came next. Footsteps approached behind her, steady, deliberate. She didn't turn until she heard the voice. "They say you stood in front of him when the bullets came," Nako said. She turned. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his chest bandaged and streaked with ash. There was blood dried along his brow, but his eyes were clear. "I did," she said simply. He nodded. "They also say you went to war with a rock in your hand." Clara let out a tired smile. "I didn't have time to find anything else." Silence lingered between them before he said quietly, "He should have died." Her jaw tightened. "He didn't." No, Nako agreed. "Because of you." The words struck deep. She swallowed hard, her throat aching. "That wasn't the plan. I didn't mean for him to get hurt. I didn't mean for any of this. Did you mean to love him?" The question hit like a gunshot. She closed her eyes. "No," she whispered. "But I do." When she looked up again, Nako wasn't staring at her with anger or distrust anymore. Something else had taken its place. Something quieter. Acceptance. "Then fight for him," he said. "Because Rafe Holloway isn't finished." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Nako's jaw hardened. "One of his men, Core Dusthorn, survived. He rode north. We tracked him to the mountain pass. If he reaches town, he'll tell them we attacked, that we're holding a white woman hostage." Clara's face paled. "Then they'll come," she murmured. "They'll bring an army." Nako nodded. "Then we have to leave," she said. "We have to run." He looked away for a moment, then met her eyes again. "He can't run. The world seems to stop." "You don't understand," Nako said, his voice steady. He was bleeding out. "Tala says even if he walks again, he won't ride for days. Maybe longer." "I'm not leaving him," she said instantly. "I'm not asking you to." His gaze held hers, sharp but calm. "But you need to understand what's coming. If we stay, we fight. And if we fight, we might not live to see the next sunrise." Clara turned toward the tent, where Tay Blackthorn lay, his body broken but breathing. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "Then we'll fight." The world they were about to defend was cruel, a world that never allowed people like her and Tay Blackthorn to exist in peace. Still, she turned to Nako Iron Trail, her voice steady as steel. "We fight," she said. At dawn, preparations began. Clara Wynnfield didn't wait for instructions, she moved with purpose. Alongside the women of the tribe, she wove traps, packed herbs, and boiled water until her hands blistered. When one woman asked if she could shoot, Clara simply nodded. A rifle was placed in her hands. Outside, Nako organized the scouts, a dozen young warriors, silent as ghosts, riding into the hills to watch for dust or movement. The others readied the defenses, sharpened stakes, driven into the ground barriers of stone and timber sand pits, carved to slow charging horses. Tay remained in Tala Moonfire's tent. By the second day, he was conscious longer. Clara sat beside him, feeding him thin broth, wiping the sweat from his brow, whispering updates about the camp. "You're still here," he murmured weakly. She smiled faintly, brushing his cheek. "Where else would I be?" He tried to sit, but winced, pain twisting his face. "They'll come for you," he said hoarsely. "They'll come for us," she corrected. He closed his eyes, breath shallow. "You could go. You could disappear before they arrive. I'm not leaving you, Tay. Leaving. You're going to get yourself killed," he said, his voice tightening. Clara leaned close until their foreheads touched. "Then I'll die beside you." "No." His hand shot up, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "You live! You run! If it comes to that, you run! Do you understand?" She looked into his eyes, defiant and fierce. "No." His expression hardened, fear and fury twisting together. "I didn't survive Rafe. Holloway didn't survive being torn from my family, locked away like a porcelain doll just to run. Now," she said, voice breaking but unyielding. "You gave me my freedom. I'm not giving it back." He stared at her for a long moment, then finally spoke, voice gravelly and low. "I love you." The words knocked the breath from her lungs. He had never said it before, never needed to until now. Spoken aloud, it split her heart wide open. "I love you," she whispered back, her lips trembling. Then she kissed him slow, tender, unafraid, holding on to that one truth between them. The attack came at twilight on the third day. The first sound was the distant thunder of hooves. Then came the dust, rolling red and thick across the horizon, rising with the heat of gunmetal and hate. At least 20 riders charged toward the village, armed with rifles, pistols, and sticks of dynamite strapped to their saddles. Nako Iron Trail barked orders, his voice cutting through the panic. Arrows were notched, traps set. The village held its breath. Clara took her place at the front, rifle in hand. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes were steady. Gone was the woman in white. She wore cotton and leather, now her hair braided tight against the wind. She looked like a warrior, and in that moment she felt like one. As the riders thundered closer, she saw him Rafe Holloway, clean-shaven, dressed in black, his posture smug atop a dark stallion. He raised his hand, halting his men just before the first line of traps. "Clara Wynnfield," he shouted, voice ringing like a sermon. She didn't flinch. "I've come to take you home." Nako glanced her way. Clara stepped forward, rifle firm in her hands. "This is my home," she called back, her voice carrying across the sand. Rafe tilted his head, almost pitying. "You're confused, girl. They've turned you against your own kind." "No," she shouted louder now, fire blazing in her chest. "You did that when you sold me like cattle, when you tried to own me." Gasps rippled through the men behind him. "I'm not yours, Rafe. I never was." His smile vanished. "You'll regret this," he growled. "I already regret ever meeting you." She pulled the trigger. The rifle's crack tore through the dusk. Then chaos erupted. Bullets ripped through tents. Arrows screamed through the air. Smoke swallowed the sun. Clara fired again and again, ducking behind the barricade as men fell around her. Screams echoed, horses reared and thrashed. Somewhere a cart exploded, fire lighting the sky. And through the haze, she saw him, Rafe Holloway, firing into the crowd. She saw a child fall. And something inside her broke. Clara Wynnfield lost herself in rage. She charged through the smoke and fire past the barricade, past the shouting warriors, her rifle clutched tight in trembling hands. She dodged one soldier, then another, her breath ragged until she stood face to face with him. Rafe Holloway. He grinned, teeth flashing beneath the dirt and gunpowder. "Didn't expect you to be this much trouble," he sneered. Clara raised her rifle, but he was faster. He slammed it aside, his fist crashing into her jaw. Pain exploded through her skull. As she hit the ground hard, dust filling her mouth and lungs. Rafe grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back. "You want to act like a savage," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Then die like one." A gunshot split the air. Clara froze. Rafe's grip loosened, his body went rigid. Then he crumpled to the dirt. Behind him stood Tay Blackthorn, pale and swaying, one arm wrapped around a staff to stay upright. His other hand still gripped a smoking pistol. Blood soaked his side, his chest. But his eyes, those fierce, dark eyes, found hers before he collapsed. Clara scrambled to him, falling to her knees and pulling him into her arms. His breathing was shallow, each exhale trembling. "You weren't supposed to fight," she cried, voice breaking. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "You weren't supposed to fall in love with me." Tears streaked her face. "I'm sorry." He shook his head weakly. "Don't be. I'd do it all again." Around them, the battle faded. Holloway's men broke and fled, leaving the ground littered with weapons and smoke. The Apache warriors rose from the shadows wounded, but standing victorious. And in the center of it all, Clara held Tay close, her heart breaking and whole at once. "Don't leave me," she whispered. His voice came faint, barely louder than the wind. "Then stay." And she did. The sun climbed slow and merciless over the scorched land, bathing it in pale gold. Smoke still curled from the ruins of Holloway's failed siege. The air carried the sharp, bitter scent of ash and blood. The village, battered but unbroken, stirred back to life, its people moving quietly through the wreckage, gathering what remained, mourning what was lost. Clara stood outside Tala Moonfire's tent, her arms wrapped around herself. Every muscle ached. Her skin was streaked with dust bruises and dried blood. But it wasn't pain that froze her. It was fear. Tay hadn't woken since collapsing in her arms. They had carried him back on a stretcher, his pulse faint, his body burning with fever. Tala had worked through the night, mixing herbs, chanting in low whispers, pressing damp cloths to his skin. Clara refused to leave him. Even when they told her it might not matter. Sometimes Tala had murmured the body returns, but the spirit does not follow. Clara hadn't answered. She had just taken Tay's hand, kissed it, and whispered promises into his ear that she was still there, that she wasn't afraid that he could rest now, that she would carry the fight for both of them. By morning, soft light spilled through the tent. Tay lay still, his chest rising in shallow breaths. His face was pale, lips, dry brow, glistening with sweat. Clara sat beside him, brushing strands of hair away from his forehead. "You told me not to fall in love with you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And I did it anyway." Her fingers traced his hand. "You told me to run, but I stayed. I stayed because you showed me what love looks like when it isn't a chain. Because when I look at you, I don't see a warrior or an enemy. I see the only place I've ever felt safe." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not ever." Silence filled the tent, broken only by his unsteady breaths. Then his fingers twitched. A sigh slipped from his lips. Her heart lurched. "Tay," she gasped. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered open, those dark, endless eyes meeting hers. "Clara," he rasped. Relief crashed through her. She laughed and sobbed all at once, cradling his face between her palms. "You came back." "I told you I would," he whispered. "You also told me not to stay," she said, tears streaking her cheeks. "I was wrong." She kissed him softly, reverently, as if he might vanish if she pressed too hard. When they parted, he drew in a shaky breath. "Is it over?" She nodded, brushing his cheek. Rafe Holloway is dead. His men are gone. The village is hurt but alive, thanks to you. Tay closed his eyes for a moment, the faintest smile on his lips. When he opened them again, something had changed. Something quiet and eternal flickering behind his gaze. And in that stillness, with smoke rising beyond the tent and dawn spilling gold across the desert, Clara realized they had survived the war. But what lay ahead was something far more powerful than vengeance. It was love, unbroken, unashamed, and alive. The weight he had carried for years, the guilt, the rage, the grief was still there, but now it felt lighter shared. "You saved me," Tay Blackthorne murmured. Clara's voice was soft, but sure. "You saved me first." The days that followed passed in quiet recovery. Tay remained under Tala Moonfire's care, gaining strength with each sunrise. Clara never left his side except to help rebuild what had been destroyed. The village mourned 3 fallen warriors and 1 child. They were buried with songs and silence, and each time Clara watched a mother cry or a sister clutch a charm to her chest, she felt the full weight of what had been risked and what had been won. One evening, as the sun turned the river gold, Nako Iron Trail found her gathering firewood by the water's edge. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "He's stronger," he said. She nodded. "He is. You fought like one of us." She looked up at him, her expression steady. "I fought because of him." Nako studied her face, then asked, "And what will you do now, Clara?" "Wynnfield?" She hesitated, the name no longer fitting her. "That's not my name anymore," she said at last. He gave a faint smile. "Then what should we call you?" Clara turned her gaze toward the horizon, the sky streaked with orange and violet. "I don't know," she said softly. "But I think I'd like to find out." Nako nodded. "Will you stay?" She met his eyes, calm and clear. "If I'm welcome, you are." He offered his hand. She shook it firmly. When Tay could finally walk again, Clara led him to the edge of the village. They stood side by side, the tall grass brushing against their legs, the scent of wild sage drifting through the wind. The land stretched endlessly before them, untamed, unforgiving, and beautiful. "Where would you go?" she asked, if you could choose. Tay's gaze followed the rolling hills. "Somewhere between here and the rest of the world," he said. "A place that belongs to no one." She smiled. "Sounds like a good place to build something." He turned to her, curious. "What would we build?" "Not just a home," she said. "A life. One where no one owns us, where every morning we wake, knowing we chose each other." He took her hand, their fingers locking together. "You still want that? After all we've faced? And what we'll face again?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Especially because of that." So they left. Not with fanfare, not with farewells, just the 2 of them, 2 horses and a trail unmarked by any map. They traveled light, a few blankets, dried food water weapons. Clara wore her mother's locket around her neck. Tay carried a smooth stone from his father's grave in his pack. They crossed riverbeds and canyons, rode through pine forests and open plains. They slept beneath the stars, made love beneath mountain shadows, and spoke of things they had once been too afraid to name, fears, dreams, the quiet ache of being alive. Weeks passed before they found it, a hidden patch of land between 2 hills fed by a clear creek and shaded by tall cottonwoods. The air smelled of earth and freedom. There they built their home. First a shelter, then a house, then a life. Tay carved symbols into the beams above the door, stories of fire, of endurance, of love, stronger than the scars that shaped them. Clara planted wildflowers near the entrance, vivid, stubborn things that bloomed even against the desert wind. They hunted, fished, traded with passing travelers. They lived quietly, fiercely, together. Years drifted by, and the world changed around them. But some things never did. One afternoon, a young couple wandered onto their land, dusty, frightened, running from the law, from family, from the same chains Clara had once worn. The girl no older than 20 stared wide-eyed at Clara. "Who are you?" Clara smiled gently. "I was a prisoner once," she said. "Then I met someone who didn't try to save me, he just let me be free." The girl tilted her head. "Weren't you afraid to love him?" Clara's gaze turned toward the creek where Tay stood barefoot in the shallows, showing their son Aaron Blackthorn how to track footprints in the mud. "No," she said. "I was afraid not to." "And where did you come from?" the girl asked. Clara looked out across the land. "Far enough," she said, "that it doesn't matter anymore." Then she turned back toward her home, the life she and Tay had built, not from blood or stone, but from the one thing no one could ever take from them: love. Sometimes the truest freedom isn't found in escape. It's found in choosing who you stand beside and what you're willing to fight for. Clara Wynnfield once thought she'd been rescued from one cage only to fall into another. But love, the kind that asks for nothing, that gives without binding, had set her free. What would you risk to be truly free? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your story. And don't go far. The next tale of the Old West is waiting right here. Click the screen and let the wind carry you back across the desert once more.